Hi everyone, I'm Christine Stone with the Customer Connect team at BMC. Joining us today in our first customer podcast series is Darren Chinen, who is the Senior Director of Data Science and Engineering at Malwarebytes. We also have Herb Van Hook on the phone, one of our VPs with the CTO office at BMC. Welcome Darren and Herb, and thanks so much for joining. It's great speaking with you again. We look forward to hearing about your thoughts around cloud and what's going on at Malwarebytes. So I'll turn it over to Herb to get us started. Herb?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Christine. I appreciate it. And Darren, thanks so much for joining us today. I think we're just going to have a bit of a conversation over the next 10, 15 minutes, Darren, and would love to hear about what's going on at Malwarebytes, especially regarding cloud and how you might be leveraging BMC solutions there. So I'll tell you what, let's start off, Darren, by you sharing with us a little bit about who Malwarebytes is, what they do in the market, and what your role is there.
We do malware protection at the endpoint, which is on your laptop or your workstation. My role here is that I run the data science and engineering team.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And does Malwarebytes, if you can tell me how you leverage cloud services, external cloud providers in any way, perhaps which major providers you leverage or use, that would be interesting, I think, to our audience.
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually are 100% on the cloud. It's a luxury coming from some previous companies that I was at, where we had a lot of legacy data centers that we had to contend with. But it's been great. We're 100% in AWS. Well, I would say we're 99% in AWS, and we just recently started using some of the Google Cloud services, just for a few things here and there. But by and large, we've been pretty committed, and all of our infrastructure runs in Amazon Web Services.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Actually, across BMC's customer set, we find Amazon as being the leading external cloud platform that our customers are leveraging, what they're using. Although we do run into customers using a lot of Google services, especially when you get into some of the data analytics problems and things like that. Google has kind of a rich set of services around that area. What types of things, you mentioned Malwarebytes 100% in the cloud. What types of benefits do you see from that? I know a lot of customers talk about, that they effectively have a more elastic cost structure to do that, that improves their time to market options, things like that. How do you all think about the benefits of leveraging the external cloud services, external cloud providers?
It's a great question, because coming from a big company like Apple, where we'd place an order for thousands of servers and wait for them to get installed and configured and set up and racked and stacked and all this kind of thing, the initial really what drew me to the cloud when I joined other smaller companies was just the speed with which you could get something up and running. And so that was the initial thought behind going to the cloud. Wow, we can really get things going quickly. In 15 minutes, I can have a cluster going. This is awesome. But you quickly realize that while that's very compelling, you can do a lot of actually the same things in virtual private clouds. And quite frankly, it becomes very cost prohibitive. So then the next line of thinking comes along, which is, okay, how do I get to things like elastic pricing? How can I think about the problem differently? And that's really where we've evolved our thinking over time from really more like a bare metal architecture, traditional architecture, and we've began to move things to the cloud, what was really just sort of a forklift to the cloud, and then we began to optimize it for cloud elasticity, and we use things like ephemeral clusters, where we used to run clusters 24/7, 365. We now can run a Hadoop cluster for an hour or two and do the same amount of processing, but we'll scale out. And then just lastly, with cloud, one of the new things that's coming out is the ability to do things in a serverless fashion, and that's a new paradigm of thinking as well.
That's great. Those are all great points. So, with your background in let's say traditional IT shops that had a lot of on-premise computing, using cloud services is almost shapes a different type of thinking in terms of both architecture, development, engineering, deployment, and operations to really not only get the value out of what you can in cloud services, but also to get it at sort of the right price point. That perhaps for some people, just doing a lift and shift of an existing workload to a cloud environment may not pay off in terms of economic sense, but could pay off with some architectural changes in how the platform uses or how the application workload uses services or how it's operated. Is that fair to say?
That's right. Yeah, I think initially just like you said, a lift and shift, all it really does is shift some of the DevOps work, right, or sysadmin work over to your cloud provider. So it may not make exactly dollars and cents financial sense, but I think once you make the move, you quickly you dive in head first, and I think you quickly realize that there's some pretty obvious optimizations that you can make.
That's great. Yeah, that's good insight. So since you brought up Hadoop a number of times, and this seems very, very core to some of the things you do, especially since you're responsible for the data science side of Malwarebytes. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the BMC solutions or BMC products that you might be using in your pursuit of your particular role and your workload responsibility as regarding to Amazon?
Yeah, we're very, very, very heavy users of Control-M. So when we went down this path, one of the things that we didn't realize, like I come from the IT world where Oracle has been around forever, right? And we use that, and it becomes sort of a pillar in how we accomplish our solutions. It's part of our architecture. Well, in the open source world, especially in big data, things are changing so quickly that what Hadoop a year ago is not the same as Hadoop today, right? Spark a year ago is not the same as Spark today. And even you're swapping out technologies very, very, very quickly. The streaming landscape is a huge one. I mean, I don't think you even hear about technologies like Flume anymore. That's like old technology. Today, everyone's talking about Spark streaming and things like Kafka and Kafka streams. And so these are such a big changing landscape. For us, we decided to sort of pin our or anchor our architecture on two things. The first one was obvious, right? We needed to basically decide where we're going to put our infrastructure, and for us that was AWS. So that was one pillar. The second thing that we realized, which may not be obvious to people, was that we realized that a lot of what we do, because we're dealing with such massive amounts of data, is we have to do a lot of this batch processing and coordinating things together. And so while it's not obvious, we needed basically a canvas, which is AWS, and we also needed a spine to hang technologies off of. And so for us, that spine or that workload automation was a perfect fit for Control-M because of all of the different types of integrations that you can do with it. And it's really with those two things we've been able to move incredibly, incredibly fast, being very, very agile in the cloud. And then, of course, with Control-M, being able to hang different technologies. We've swapped out technologies many, many times. Even over the last 12 months, we've gone from pretty much static Hadoop clusters on Cloudera, which were controlled by Control-M, to we don't even have a Cloudera cluster anymore. We moved over to Qubole. We have Databricks that hangs off of there that actually does a lot of our data science and machine learning. We hang Tableau reports off of there. So there's quite a bit of agility that we have because we have sort of this centralized spine of a coordinated workload activity. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. It does. It's a very interesting point of view, though. I mean, Control-M, BMC's Control-M, is really the industry's premier workload automation solution in traditional data centers. I mean, it's the market-leading solution out there. It's very interesting how you've made use of it because terms like batch computing and cloud don't seem to fit together very well in most people's minds. They don't seem to be kind of in that same bucket. But the way you tell the story and the way you painted that is having a general purpose workload automation solution with a wide range of integration capabilities, so you can plug and play and evolve the different component technologies you need in the cloud world, especially that world that moves so fast. As you said, things that were popular a year ago may be subsumed by something that's popular right now, and it can be very, very different a year from now. And you want some solution that kind of evolves with you.
That's right.
Can you share with me a little bit more? I get the integration points, but how do you really use Control M in this world? Are you using it for data movement, coordination of Hadoop jobs? What are you using there? And Control M, I know, has various interfaces. It has the traditional UI interfaces where people can define job flows and execute them and monitor them. It also has more recently, native API interfaces, for example, for doing things like job definition control. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you're using it in the environment and how it's fitting in for you there?
Sure. So we ingest billions and billions of pieces of like anonymous information, and we collect that right at our endpoint. And it actually goes through a stream processing, which is all done in Kafka and Kafka streams. And then the data sort of forks in two directions. We have a Lambda architecture here, where there is a real-time component, but the other direction that the data goes is it all gets dumped into S3. And that really has become, that is a big paradigm shift for us, because we used to centralize all the data in HDFS. We no longer use HDFS for storage at all. So once the data is in S3, Control M takes over and really handles all of our batch processing, as well as all of our data science and machine learning, as well as analytics. And so what we do is we use Control M to fire up some ephemeral Hadoop clusters, which are on Kubel. It also fires up some Spark clusters as well on Kubel. It does all of the data movement. We do enrichment, cleansing. We do a lot of aggregation, joins, etc. And we build out the data in these sort of ephemeral Hadoop clusters. Once the processing is done, the data gets placed back on S3, and then Control M fires up the next job, which might mean reaching out to a Databricks cluster, firing up a Databricks cluster, which is on Spark, and completing a machine learning task, right, to update the algorithms. And then it may also fire up and reach out to, like, let's say Tableau, and refresh all the reports for the day. So you can see kind of the spine of Control M kind of coordinating and fluidly going and interacting with many, many, many different systems. That's really where Control M plays a big role for us.
Okay, wow. So you've got a lot of different things going on, and some things that are sequential, some things in parallel, and you're using Control M to coordinate all of that. Do you make use of the automation API that is a programmable function to Control M, or are you making use of the direct user interface, the UI screens directly? How do you interact and sort of tell Control M what you want it to do?
We do both. The engineers actually have the option to do either, because at the end of the day, we actually get all the metadata out, right, as code anyway, and it gets stored in GitHub. But the engineers have the option, and quite frankly, it's funny because being a data science and engineering organization, most engineers will tell you that they hate GUIs. They hate GUIs, and so sort of the jobs as code thing was a very big deal to us, and having this API like parity was great. But what's interesting about it was most of the new engineers will actually start off like they like the codifying thing. But then they realize that sort of checking on their jobs and looking and understanding where the workflow is, it actually is more convenient to do that in the GUI. And so we actually have, it's kind of funny, right? Like the Control M GUI is actually so good, it's actually taken pretty hardcore command line, IDE Java engineers, and has converted them to sort of believers in both the automation API as well as the GUI. I do see them sometimes have the GUI open.
That's pretty amazing, actually. That's pretty interesting, because I know with the huge influx of DevOps skills and processes and tool chains, and with people that grew up and are used to basically programmatic interfaces to everything. That's a bit of a shift in their thinking then to say, well, maybe the UIs aren't that bad. Yeah. maybe they provide value also. So I'll tell you, that's a great story. Are you finding, in terms of the value you get out of this, are you finding sort of new things you can do with it, even though you've been at this for a while? Are you finding new use cases, new abilities, things you can sort of dynamically extend what Control M can do? And are you getting value in terms of just higher degrees of automation, faster processing, better leverage of cloud services? How do you kind of think about or even measure the value you get out of this?
Well, let me tackle that from a little bit of a different angle. I would say this, that most of my colleagues in big data have engineering teams that are very reluctant to purchase a third-party tool to do workload automation because they think it's like somehow cheating or something, right? So they go, well, I'm not going to do that. And they start off with something like cron. Right, everyone starts with cron, and then you realize, like, oh my gosh, either my jobs are, running over each other, or there's so much idle time that I'm just wasting money. And so they move to something else like Jenkins, and then they realize that that's not going to work. And then, they try, and eventually they try to either land on something like open source, like Airflow, which is totally unsupported, or they'll try and build their own thing. And we laugh at that, because even my engineers are like, I don't know if we should be buying something. We're engineers. We're Java guys. Like, what? It's like cheating to do this. And I said, well, just think about it this way, right? If you were the designer for the new BMW, for example, and it was your job to design a new car, do you have to like make your own tires? Or would that be cheating to go out and just buy Michelin tires? It's still a new car, but the question is, where are you spending your effort? And so a lot of my colleagues have teams that have actual development teams trying to solve a problem that's already been solved, which is workload automation. And we love it now. I mean, the biggest value is that I actually did a comparison, like I said, with some of my colleagues. They're spending like literally man weeks, entire sprints, entire small teams of 2 or 3 people working on this problem. And we actually measured it. We took the time to measure how much time do we spend on workload automation and job scheduling and coordination across my entire engineering team for an entire sprint, which would be a 2-week sprint. And it turned out that the amount of time that was actually spent scheduling jobs and figuring these out in dev and prod and pushing them to prod was less than 20 minutes across all of my engineers. And so to me, that's the biggest payoff, is the reliability, the flexibility. As new technologies, we move in and out. We literally just introduced Databricks. We're introducing another couple of new technologies. We did a POC and we tried to hook them into what I call the spine of Control M. It was all of 15 minutes, and the POC was done. And so that is really the big value add, at least to me.
I'll tell you, that's a great story, and really it's very amazing what you've been able to do there at Malwarebytes. And And our technology combined with your creativity is really, I think, helped you keep ahead of the game and really move ahead in what you're trying to do there. So I think we're at the end of our time now, and I really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing your story with other customers and people who want to listen to this. I'm really fascinated by what you're doing there at Malwarebytes, and would love to stay in touch with you and follow up in the future. So with that, Christine, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap us up. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Darren, for your time and sharing your insights around cloud and your cloud environment at Malwarebytes. We really appreciate your partnership, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.